Hello and welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara, and this month we read The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne.
Let's talk a little bit about John first. John Gwynne is the author of epic fantasy series The Faithful and the Fallen, of Blood and Bone, and then now the Bloodsworn saga, of which Shadow of the Gods is the first of two books. He's also a Viking reenactor and enjoys nothing more than standing in the shield wall with his three sons, who are as passionate about swords and axes as he is. He lives on the south coast of the UK with his beautiful wife, three sons, and a daughter, and an assortment of animals. At the moment, he has three dogs, a horse, and a lamb who thinks she's a dog. But anyway, do you want to tell us a little bit about the specs of the book?
Sure, this was originally published on May 6th of 2021. It is considered high fantasy for the genre. It is 480 pages and currently has a 4.3 on Goodreads, a 4.4 on Barnes & Nobles, a 4.6 on Amazon, and a 4.5 on Audible. And it has been nominated for the Goodreads Choice Award for Fantasy in 2021. And as of this recording, it hasn't won any awards. And we think it's important for readers to know what, if any, representation is in the books we read. So for this book, there are no representation. There are no POC characters, no LGBTQ plus characters, and no characters with disability, unfortunately.
Okay, well, do you want to, since we're missing our third member, Lauren, do you want to give us a little short summary of the book?
So this book is about... So it's based off of Norse legends, but it's not based off of one particular Norse location. That's going to be fun for me to say. Norse location inspired by Norse, I believe. But so it takes place in fictional area, fantasy, and you follow three characters, and you get three POVs of those characters, and it is in third person for all three of them. Let's see here. It is Orca, Varg, and Elvar. And Orca lives with her husband and son. Varg is a escaped, I think they call them thralls, who's trying to get vengeance. And Elvar is a member of a war band. And you just follow these three characters as their story kind of unfolds in this Norse-inspired world. I don't know what else to say without it really spoiling.
I think that's perfect without getting into spoilers.
There's a lot of warriors. They're all warriors in their own right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think that was great. It's kind of one of those. It's hard to summarize without spoilers. There are a lot of those for this one. So I think that was good. So what did you think about The Shadow of the Gods? And remember, no spoilers.
So I enjoyed it overall. It's definitely a slow burn, and it has a lot of character development, and there are some really great character arcs and exposition, but the pay at the end is definitely well worth it. But just keep that in mind if you are one of those people who maybe isn't a huge story / character driven. I would say this is more character driven. The first book, at least, is more character driven, not necessarily plot driven. It's definitely based on the characters and what they're doing, and that drives along the plot. There are plenty of badass women in the book, so I did enjoy that. And then the world building is super interesting. I really enjoyed the world. I do have a little bit of experience in the Norse, I won't call it folklore, but just history and all that. This one touches base a little bit on it, like as far as like the creatures in the world, but I think some other stuff he kind of created himself, if I'm not mistaken. But the world building is really interesting, and it slowly develops. And it's not like he doesn't do a lot of like dump on you. Although the only thing that I would have an issue with is it would have been nice to have a glossary of terms, at least that you could reference in like the front of the book.
Let's say there's one in the back of the book, but...
Well, yeah, just in the front of the book, or maybe even, I don't know, something. But I mean, in the back of the book, they give you a bit of stuff, but not a lot. Like, some words aren't on there.
Which is fair. I mean, the glossary is there, but I definitely didn't know that until way into the book, so I was doing a lot of Googling, like I'm sure you were, to try to figure out some of the words meant. So yeah, I really liked the book. It's one of my favorites we've read this season. I also liked John Gwynne going into it. That wasn't shocking for me. I was expecting to like it rather. Barbara's definitely right, though. It is a slow burn. It's one you have to approach with the knowledge that it is the first book of a series. So if you've read other series, you should know going into that means there's going to be a lot of character development. So you're getting to know these characters. There's going to be a lot of world building, so they build out the world. We definitely got a lot of that in this book, which does lead to a slow burn, and that just happens with that, and that's okay. I think it was well done. I don't think the pacing was so slow that it became boring. I think there was a relatively nice balance between some of the slow burn world building and character development stuff and the action, which there is a lot of. I really liked the characters. I thought they were well written. I liked the overall plot and story. I can't wait to continue the series too. I mean, it's very good. I liked all around. It was cool to see the badass women, as Barbara mentioned as well. 2 of our 3 POV characters are women that are badasses, so that was cool and accurate, right, Barbara? As far as how the Viking culture was.
I mean, technically, yes.
Okay.
Women had, like, if you're saying like olden times, compared to that, yes, women had more rights in their society. It's still not, exactly to the men's, but definitely more than like other societies had.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. But anyway, so yeah, we aren't going to go into our individual ratings like we never do. You have to wait till the end for that. But our group score for this one was an 8.5 out of 10. So, follow-up question: would you recommend this book? For me, yes, I would. If you like fantasy, you're going to like it. If you're into Norse mythology or the mythology in general, you're going to enjoy it because there's a whole lot of that thrown in. I think that it's like other fantasy books we've reviewed on this show. If you're someone who just absolutely hates the genre, then obviously that's an easy not recommend. But for pretty much anybody else, I would recommend it. I think it's a really good book. I think of like the quote unquote high fantasy genre, I think this one has maybe a little bit lower bar to entries than some of the others. It's not 1,000 pages long. It's not quite as hard to get into as some of the others might be. And there's only 2 books, so it's not like you're like starting a potential like 10 book series or something. Like there's only 2 out now. There's going to be 3, but there's only 2 out right now. So I think I'd recommend it to almost anybody.
Yeah, so I would recommend this to people who enjoy high fantasy novels with, really good, a great world building characters with some really good story arcs or character arcs / character development and all that jazz. But I think I might slightly disagree with you about this is an easy one to pick up. Like, it's still a very long book. Most fantasy novels are. So, I mean, I guess in comparison to 1,000-page book, this 600, I think or no, I guess I said 480.
480, yeah.
I mean, that's still considered, I think, above. Well, maybe for fantasy, it's considered like a normal, but like for other genres, that's considered longer.
I wonder what the average page length, like not for like this genre, but like for fiction in general, what like the average page length of a book is.
I don't know.
Yeah,
No idea.
me either. So at this point, for those of you leaving us, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us, and make sure you're following us on both Facebook and Instagram. In both of those places, our handle is at BadassThatPod. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got a book you want us to read, let us know. Now let's do a short preview of our next episode. So next month, we are reading Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which was recommended to us by Jazz on Instagram. Thank you for the recommendation. Also, Lauren will be joining us again next month for this episode. I only mention that because the person who recommended this book specifically recommended it with Lauren in mind. She thought it would be a sci-fi book that she would be into. So here's a quick synopsis. Are you happy with your life? Those are the last words Jason Dessen hears before the masked abductor knocks him unconscious, before he awakens to find himself strapped to a gurney surrounded by strangers in hazmat suits. Before a man Jason's never met smiles down at him and says, "Welcome back, my friend." In this world he's woken up to, Jason's life is not the one he knows. His wife is not his wife, his son was never born, and Jason is not an ordinary college physics professor, but a celebrated genius who has achieved something remarkable, something impossible. Is it this world or the other that's the dream? And even if the home he remembers is real, how can Jason possibly make it back to the family he loves? The answers lie in a journey more wondrous and horrifying than anything he could have imagined, one that will force him to confront the darkest parts of himself, even as he battles a terrifying, seemingly unbeatable foe. Dark Matter is a brilliantly plotted tale that is at once sweeping and intimate, mind-bendingly strange, and profoundly human, a relentlessly surprising science fiction thriller about choices, paths not taken, and how far we'll go to claim the lives we dream of. Dun, dun, dun. Anyway, remember the second part of this episode is going to be an in-depth look at this book, Shadow of the Gods. So if you do want to read it, stop listening right now and come back when you are done.
Hey guys, my name's Abby, and I co-host the Book Life podcast with my best friend Mo. We cover fantasy, sci-fi, and historical fiction books, and talk book-related topics like our favorite character types, world building, and books versus their movies. New episodes drop every Monday on your favorite platform. Now, back to your show.
Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. So we'll start off like we always do for the spoiler section, the Badass Character Award. Barbara, who are you nominating for this book for the Badass Character Award?
So I feel like this one was kind of hard because all of these characters in their own right are pretty badass. Like our three main point of view characters, even not even them. Like I feel like there's not one person who's crappy except for like I want to consider him a bad guy per se, but he's definitely not. I mean, like any fantasy book, I feel like there's like a lot of bad guys. He's like a minor bad guy. But besides that, everyone else is pretty legit. But I think I would have to pick Orca as mine just because kind of her love for her son is the driving force behind like her motivation and her story pretty much throughout the whole book. So I would say Orca, because she's also the most seasonal of fighters between the three people that we get.
True. Yeah, I mean, like you said, this was a hard one. They're really, like with the exception of children, there weren't any like non-badass characters in this book, in some definition of the word anyway. But for me, it was a tough choice between Orca and Elvar, because like Barbara said, Orca is the most seasoned fighter. All you have to do is read like one of her chapters from like mid-book to understand how much of a badass she is. Like there's one chapter where she slays like 10 men by herself. And then the flip side of that is Elvar, who's also a badass fighter in her own right. But she also is kind of a badass as well for she's now that we're in the spoiler section, we can say this, but she is princess the right term for what for her royal? Because it's not like royalty.
It's not royalty, so no, I wouldn't consider it princess. So it's her dad's a jarl.
Yeah, she's the daughter of a jarl, which I guess in this society essentially means that she's expected to be kind of like a princess would have been in a medieval story, where she's expected to marry someone in another clan and help them unite the clans and make more power and yada yada yada. And so she's not only a badass fighter, but she's a badass because she kind of bucks the norm. And says, no, Dad, I want to go out and be this badass fighter warrior. I don't care about marrying some random dude. So that was kind of badass too. So it's kind of a tie for me, but I'm going to say Orca because then we can actually give the award to somebody, since we don't have Lauren to be our tiebreaker this time. But I just wanted to make sure I laid that out there because they were both even ground candidates for me. But I think since they're even ground for me and you picked Orca, Orca wins. Congratulations, Orca. Okay, so let's talk about some of the characters a little bit, and we actually are going to start with Orca. Barbara, do you want to give us a little snapshot of Orca?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, Orca is the more seasoned character of the three. She's the older one. I don't actually know how old she is, but I'm assuming maybe 30s, late 30s.
That was my guess. I was literally about to ask you how old she was. I thought you might have known.
No, I don't, because I don't think the book ever mentioned it. But that's kind of where I'm thinking. So her and her husband and their son have settled down and kind of want a quiet life. And you get aspects of like both of them actually being like badass warriors and stuff. And then come to find out that she actually is, in fact, from a war band and just, I think, they wanted a quiet life since they had a kid and didn't want that life, I'm assuming, for the child. So you find out, and there's huge hints that you find out that she is what the society calls am I forgetting the term? Tainted. Thank you.
I should also say huge hints for Barbara, subtle hints for the rest of us.
No, I don't think so. I feel like you picked up on that she was a tainted.
No, I did, but not as quickly as you did.
Okay. So you pick up very early on that her and her husband are tainted. And what that means, that's their term, not mine. But what that means is that they have the god's blood in them, like running through them. So that gives them extra abilities. And depending on the bloodline of the god, you get their abilities of that god. So, you have like your wolf, your dragon, your rat, your bear, etc., etc. She is from the wolf lineage, and excuse me, but I do not remember any of their actual names because it's very Norse sounding, and I'm not going to butcher it by any accounts. But she is from the wolf lineage, and her story essentially is her son's been kidnapped and her husband killed. R.I.P. That was really sad.
That was really sad.
And her whole story is literally her trying to avenge her husband's death and to get her son back, essentially. And she goes through all these people trying to find her son. Unfortunately, in this book, she does not find him. And it's a hell of a last scene with her just covered in blood after like murdering the whole effing village. Very, very
that
cool.
Was a badass scene.
But that's Orca kind of a little bit in a nutshell. And her husband is actually of the bear lineage. So
yeah, the bear lineage I could present. That's just berserker. That one's easy. I looked up.
Is that actually how you pronounce it? Berserker?
That's how it was in the audiobook that I listened to. Yeah. So I looked up the wolf one, and I don't feel any better about saying it, even though it's right in front of me.
That's why I said
it's descended from Ulfrir, which is the name of the
Ulfrir.
god. And I think I'm going to try to pronounce this, and I'm just saying it's going to be bad, but Ulfthednar is what Orca is called. I regret looking it up. I wish I would have just left it.
That's why I didn't know how to say it, or didn't know what it was called. I just didn't know how to freaking say it, and I didn't even want to attempt to try. So,
well, I gave it a shot. It was probably not great, but that's what she is. Let's see. So the way I've organized this. We're going to talk about like Orca, who's our main POV character, and then the characters from her story, and then kind of move on from there. So, the two main characters in her story are actually not her husband and son because they're only with her for a short time at the beginning of the book. But otherwise, these two boys named Lif and Mord. I'm going to talk about them together because you'll understand in a second. But they're high school age boys, right, Barbara? That's about how age
they are. I would say high school. Well,
younger because they were friends of her son.
Yeah, so I think she said they're like 17, 18, 19-ish range, okay. 20s. Like they're young enough to not know any better, but like older than, like 10, 15, that type.
So like late teens, we'll say.
I think young adults. I think, we'll say young adults, I would say. Young adults.
And what happens with them is that their father is a fisherman in the village that Orca and her husband and son live nearby, and ends up in a fight with Gudvar, who's someone we'll talk about in a little bit, and he kills him in a really brutal fashion, and probably...
No, Gudvar is not the one who kills their father.
Oh, no, that's right. Gudvar was fighting him, but then what was that?
He loses to the father.
He loses to the father, and then the
tainted thrall that is their jarls' tainted thrall is the one who goes over there and murders
brutally
their father, brutally. Yeah. And it kind of the whole chain of events kind of starts with that.
Yeah. And so that happens, and so these boys want revenge on Gudvar because he was the reason all of this happened, and so that's their part of the story. And Orca is kind of not necessarily wrapped up in that, but shortly after that happens, the stuff that Barbara was mentioning, where her husband gets killed and her son gets taken, happens shortly after, and so these tragic events happen near each other in time, and she goes in and does some killing and tries to figure out what's going on.
We're not talking
Orca.
About her. I know, why are you so bad at this?
I am, because it's hard.
Lif and Mord are these teenagers that were fishermen. The parent, their father dies. Orca releases them because they're idiot enough to try to go and murder Gudvar after the fact. Obviously, get caught because they don't know any better. And she releases them from being imprisoned while she's trying to figure out what happened to her son. Yes. And then they wait around for her. They have a boat, and so she has an exchange with them, or what do you call a
A deal.
A deal. Thank you. A deal with them. If obviously no one's seen me, but I'm like flailing my hands around trying to get Michael to help me with words here. Anyway, so she has a deal with them where they ask her to teach them how to fight because she is literally like the best fighter ever. In exchange, she can borrow their boat to go and try to go to the village that she last maybe thinks the person who took her son is at.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kind of just keep following her around, and they kind of save each other throughout the whole story because they want her help, and it's kind of like what they're doing versus what she's trying to do kind of gets intertwined in that sense. There you go. That's all you needed to say.
The problem with me with these character descriptions is like I just like start telling the whole story.
Yes, no one needs the whole story. Just that's a little basic information from them. They kind of are her companions in their fight. They run into a lot of stuff. There you go.
Yeah.
So
all
that's
right.
them.
That's Leaf Mord. Barbara, why don't you tell us about Thorkel?
Why don't you tell us about Thorkel? Because there's not much to tell. So if you go on this tangent, I'd be surprised.
So Thorkel is Orca's husband. Like Barbara mentioned earlier, he is of the bear descendant and also a tainted. I really liked the beginning of the book when we got their relationship because, like Barbara mentioned before, they were part of a war band. They had left to settle down and have this quiet life, like literally like an idyllic, quiet life, like on a farm outside of town, living on their own. It was very idyllic and perfect. And then obviously shit hits the fan. And Thorkel is he's what I really liked when we did get to see him alive. I loved seeing him as a dad to their son. I thought that the way that was written, because Orca, her character is kind of a hothead, which I don't know if we mentioned that before. Her character is kind of a hothead, and Thorkel is kind of the balancing for her. So he's at the opposite. He's not a hothead. He's very calm, cool, and collected. And so it was interesting to see kind of their parenting style as like their personalities contrasted, and like she would be. But there's not much else to tell about Thorkel. The only thing to really mention is that he's also a freaking badass because when Orca does come back to their house and finds out that her son was taken, she finds Thorkel on he was dying, right? He hadn't died yet. He was dying.
No.
And there were just like bodies all over the place. So he had killed like 10 of these people that came to try to take their son. Maybe more than that.
And they find out that it was a dragon born. So that means it's the blood god of Likrifa, which is the dragon god.
Remember,
what?
He says that, and she doesn't believe it.
Well, that's because in this story, no one believes that any descendants of a dragon actually are around because no one's seen them. Like they're in hiding.
They've all been wiped out.
Right. They've never seen any tainted ones of them or any of there's like none of them running around that they've seen. So they don't believe. Nobody believes that a dragon-born tainted exists. And when he tells her that, she's like, WTF? Like, how can that be possible?
Right. Which is a frequent theme in the book with all of our characters whenever dragonborns are mentioned. But
seriously, yes.
Yeah.
Another fun fact with Thorkel is he, at the very, very, very end of the book, you discover that Orca is related to Varg's story in the sense that her husband Thorkel is the brothers of Glornir, who we're going to get into later on. But just remember that fun fact. And was a shocker to me. I was like, oh my God, that's how it's all connected. Yay.
It was fun to see everything all connect at the end.
Mm-hmm. So that is Thorkel.
Now, I did better with Thorkel, so now you can talk.
Still talked quite a bit, but yes, fair enough.
Yeah, you know me. I can talk quite a bit about anything. Gudvar is who I want to hear about.
Yeah, Gudvar is kind of the enemy of Lif and Mord, a little bit of Orca, just because she kind of screwed him over too. But he is the jarl of their countryside's second in command. What do they call it? Her Bloodsworn. Excuse me, her Bloodsworn. And he's pretty much a pompous asshole who thinks he's so much better than he is. He's a bit younger. He doesn't really have much battle experience. Orca keeps like mentioning all this. And so obviously when Orca lets Lif and Mord escape and she kind of kills the Jarl's lover and kind of disfigures her. The Jarl
disfigures her.
Does disfigure her. She sends Gudvar out to for retribution. So he's the one that's kind of chasing them all along during Orca and Lif and Mord's paths, trying to get away. And I have a feeling he's going to play a bigger role because they don't kill him obviously, and he kind of catches up to them, all that jazz. So that's him. He's just kind of an asshole. a pompous asshole, essentially.
I kind of got, maybe you did too, but I kind of got Gaston vibes from Gudvar.
Yes, I can see that. Although he doesn't think himself as pretty like Gaston does, but
no, but he thinks he's a badass
yes,
like Gaston did. Like Gaston thought he was like manly and big and perfect.
That would be Gudvar, yes.
Yes, so, that was all I meant by that.
Yes.
So moving on from Orca and her squad of characters, we'll talk about Varg. Varg is our next POV character, the only male POV character. Varg, we start out, Varg has escaped from being a thrall, which in this world is effectively a slave. Literally, they wear like collars, thrall collars. Most of the thrall are, I shouldn't say most, a fair amount of the thrall are tainted. There's a very active slave trade in this world of tainted thrall that they use for different things. But Varg is a thrall that's escaped. We learn shortly after that he may or may not have killed his owner as well. Varg's main mission in the book is we find out that his sister died, and he doesn't know who killed her, and he wants to find a satyr witch and have her perform some sort of a ritual that will let him see her final moments, and he can find out who killed his sister and then go kill that person. That's revenge. Pretty much, that's Varg's motive, his very, very revenge. And I really loved his story because it starts out as just like revenge and revenge only, and that's all I care about. And he kind of slowly peels like an onion. You peel back layer after layer with Varg, and as he joins this, the Bloodsworn, right, is who he was.
I've been calling everyone a Bloodsworn, so is that not right?
The Bloodsworn is Varg's war band that he joins.
Oh, well, I've literally just called Gudvir's as a Bloodsworn to what's her face.
Glornir is the leader of the Bloodsworn, so that's appropriate.
I said Gudvir, bro.
Oh, oops. Yeah,
so what is it? What is it when your little fighters for the jarl? But this is what I'm talking about. The freaking language here. You should have had this up here. I thought you did.
You know, it's actually not here.
That's what I'm saying. Things that should be in the freaking glossary, it's not.
But yeah, the Bloodsworn is the group that Varg starts rolling with after he gets accepted with them. But so yeah, we see Varg become a fighter with the Bloodsworn, and he kind of goes from this person who was like kind of a bar brawler to make money to slowly becomes an actual warrior or fighter. And that's just kind of Varg in a nutshell without going.
God, you missed out like the biggest part. So like he's your character essentially that doesn't know much about this world because he was a slave essentially. So he's never left his little area of slavery. And then the whole world opens up when he's traveling around. So he's that character that you kind of learn the basics of this world is his point of view because all the other characters already know it. So they don't need that explanation.
That's a good thing to say.
Another thing is it's also very apparent and obvious that he is also tainted, and he doesn't learn that yes, it is. He also doesn't learn that he is tainted because obviously he would have no idea as someone who grew up as a slave that he is. Much later, like his last few chapters essentially, in that he is the descendant of also the wolf as well. Once again, not going to try to butcher that one. And he finds out that the band that he's in, the Bloodsworn, are a group of tainted warriors, and he didn't know that they were tainted until they, told him. But that is Varg that you completely forgot to mention that he is.
I do want to talk about one other thing with Varg because it was one of my favorite scenes with him when he first encounters the Bloodsworn and they're having tryouts to see if you're a good enough fighter to join their war band. And the part of the tryouts are you're fighting a half ogre, right? Half troll. That's right. Who's part of the war band, and they're fighting, and it's very unconventional. It's Varg style, and he ends up before he gets knocked unconscious by this half troll, he bites and takes like a chunk out of the troll's leg, which is a continuing kind of comical thing they talk about in the band from that point forward. But I thought that was a really neat scene, the bar brawl between the two of them. That's Varg. You want to tell us about Torvik?
Torvik isn't that important of a person. He's the person that befriends Varg in the sense that he's the only... I mean, there's quite a few people that befriend Varg, but he's the one that, with no hidden motivations whatsoever, not that the other ones have hidden motivations, they're just trying to train him, essentially. He's the one who just befriends him to be a friend. And they kind of start from the bottom and rise up in the sense that Torvik is an apprentice to the weapons maker of this war band. He is tainted as well, like everyone else is, and I believe he's a tracker too, and I don't think it ever says what kind of tainted he is,
No, I
but
don't
I'm
think it did.
assuming he might be wolf, because it's kind of implied that wolves have really good sense for tracking, essentially. So he might be one of those, not really sure. But unfortunately, when him and Varg get really close, and like Varg is like finally deciding like, hey, maybe my life doesn't have to be just about vengeance. I can actually stay in this war band and help them out, and maybe get vengeance in another way. They'll help me, because even Torvik is like, hey, I'll help you with your vengeance. Torvik unfortunately dies. He gets killed by the queen. It's not a magician. They have an actual word for it. It's not going to be in the glossary, because the glossary doesn't have this kind of crap in it, but he is.
But it should, yeah.
He's not so only the tainted can do magic, the cedar witches, but this guy actually studied the magic, so he can do magic. I have no idea what they're called. I couldn't tell you, but that's who killed Torvik. That's Torvik.
Next person with Varg is Rokia. Rokia is another member of the Bloodsworn. She is the person who is responsible for training Varg, and as far as getting him to be a better fighter. Their relationship's really interesting throughout the book, because it goes from one that is very contentious, like Varg clearly does not like her because she's beating him up.
I don't think it's contentious. You think you read it that way?
I think it kind of was at the beginning.
I don't think so. She's just a hard ass on him because she wants to keep him alive, and he's just begrudgingly like, oh, she like beats me. Essentially, she's beating him up, so of course you're not going to like that. But I don't see any ill will towards her.
No, I guess that's true. So not contentious.
I wouldn't say that was a good word.
It wasn't. Fair enough. Their relationship is, I wouldn't say they're friendly. They're not friends, because she's the one training him. She's beating him up every day. And I think they slowly become friends throughout the training as he gets better and she gains more respect for him. And he opens up a little bit. Yeah,
she's the one who gives him his nickname. It's Varg No Sense.
Yep.
She literally says he has no sense when he's fighting. And yet he always makes it through the fights. And she's like, how is this happening?
No.
But that's... sense some hint of romance between
those
two.
Think so? Oh.
I do think so, yes.
Well, you're usually right. So
especially because at the end, when they admit that they're all tainted, she becomes more friendly towards him. And I think the reason why she wasn't to begin with was because she wasn't sure if they could trust him. And now that they did, and they can trust him, she's very more actually openly nice to him. Like, she smiles at him. He's like, this is kind of weird. She's smiling at me. I've never seen her smile at me. So you kind of get that. So I do sense a hint of romance there, so I'll be very curious to know if that happens. I also really liked Rakia. I thought she was a hilarious character. She's funny but hard on Varg, and so their scenes together are really funny, because she was like, you would have died when he did something wrong. And she's like, you would have died here. And then at one point he forgets to take out the cap of his spear to go poke someone, and she's like, hey, maybe next time remove that so you can actually kill someone with it.
Rokia very much has Barbara's sense of humor.
Yes.
Yeah. And now you can finally talk about Glornir, who you were mentioning before.
Yeah, there's not too much about Glornir. He's just the head honcho of the Bloodsworn warband. I don't know what they call them. It's not chiefs and stuff like that. He's the leader. He's the leader of them. He took over after their main leader passed away. He's throughout the whole, and this is why I feel like you can kind of give hints that this whole group of people are tainted, or at least a lot of them are, because of how the way he treats, quote unquote, the tainted people, because he's very nice to anyone that he knows is tainted. Most of these war bands have a cedar witch that protects them in the water, who can do magic and all this stuff. His does not wear the thrall collar, because most of the tainted need to wear, or in the society have to wear the thrall collars. None of his people do. The respect that you see that he has for these people, uncommon in this world. And so that's why I even remember mentioning it to Michael. I was like, I really like him because he treats these people like they're his equal. Come to find out, it's because he is one. And come to find out as well that his wife, which is their warband Cedar Witch, is his wife. One off. You didn't know that. They kept that a secret. And two, that's how Varg's story gets tied into Elvar's story, because she is the sister of the Cedar Witch that Elvar's warband picks up.
No, you're right. Sorry. Boop.
No. So if you're going to interrupt people, at least do it correctly. She is sisters with the Cedar Witch that Elvar's warband picks up. So that's how they tie into Alvar, which is very, very interesting. So that's a little bit of Glornir. Oh, and then obviously Glornir is Orca's husband's brother, Thorkel's brother. And I don't know who's older, who's younger.
And then we have our third point of view character, Alvar. Alvar is a new warrior to the warband that she is a part of.
She's very young too.
She's very young. Her warband is dramatically different than the Bloodsworn. They are effectively, literally the opposite. They're effectively slavers. They sell tainted to.
They track down and sell them.
Track down and sell tainted to different jarls and whoever's willing to buy. Alvar is initially presented as just another member of the warband, but we find out later on that she is actually the daughter of the Jarl of Sneka.
I don't know how you pronounce it. Sneka?
There's a town that's inside the Snake God, and that's where her dad lives and is in charge of. And so we find out that, and that she's kind of bailed on her, I guess, royal-esque life to be in this warband. But she is young. She's relatively green, but she's still pretty badass when it comes down to it. I really enjoyed her character at the end. I will be honest that, and I told Barbara this, I did not like Alvar at first. I would be reading and get to an Alvar chapter, like, oh god, just be one of the other characters. But I came to like Alvar. I didn't like her at all at first.
So out of the 3 point of view characters, I think she has the biggest character arc.
Mm-hmm.
Of them all, because like you said, she was green, but her point of view is she's kind of your standard person like everyone else, where she doesn't like the tainted. She sees them as thralls, and same with just normal human thralls. She just sees them as that because her father owns all these things. Right. She didn't see them as equals or anything like that. And I have a feeling her point of view is going to change, especially how the last of hers ended. Maybe she might have, I don't know, because also the tainted also kind of screwed everything up for her too.
I was going to say
not. But
I know what you're talking about. And I was going to say that could go either way.
Yeah, that could go either way. But I do think like she's the most close-minded of the 3, and I have a feeling that I don't know, but I feel like her character arc is the one that grew the most. Varg, and then Orca's just Orca. Like, she knows she's older, so she knows who she is in the world, and kind of that she doesn't get too much of a character arc. Alvar is the only one who is not tainted from the POV characters as well.
Yes, that is also true.
She's just a normal little human. And her story leads her and her war band to go find this secret location where all the last war was fought between the gods. And that's where Lick Rifa was imprisoned. Well, I know it's imprisoned. Was told, no. The history that's mentioned that she was imprisoned there, but since nobody believed it, obviously they didn't actually think she was there. Come to find out that she is. Spoiler alert.
Okay, you want to tell us about Grend, Alvar's?
Yes, Grend is pretty much Alvar's bodyguard. So it's hinted that Grend made it's not hinted, it's pretty much told that Grend made a blood pact, I think I'm not quite sure what they call it. It's like some type of magical pact with Alvar's mother. We don't know how Alvar's mother died. We just know that she is dead. But Grend made a pact with her mother to protect Alvar, because I believe Grend was her mom's bodyguard before he was Alvar, and he made a Bloodsworn to protect... Bloodsworn, no. There's too many Bloods and Sworns and all these things. Anyways, he made a promise to the mom that he would protect Alvar, so he pretty much follows her everywhere. They have like more of a father-daughter relationship, I think, than Alvar ever had with her actual father. Like, he actually listens to her, and granted, he does kind of have to follow her everywhere. I think he trusts in her and her abilities in jazz, and he's just this overprotective father figure / bodyguard for her, and I really like his character too.
Yeah, I did too. For the Game of Thrones people out there, I kind of thought of him like the Hound.
Really?
This is like an attached bodyguard like that. Like that was just a...
Yeah, I pictured him more like Ser Joraiya with Dany, but without the creepy "I'm in love with you."
Yeah, that's actually that is. If you cut
that's
out the
how
creepy,
I pictured it.
If you cut out the creepy, that's actually a really good comparison.
"I'm in love with you" aspect of their relationship. Yeah. That's kind of how I see it. Like, it's a sworn protector for her, like the younger,
Yeah. Okay, so moving on from there, Bjor is next. Bjor is another member of Elvar's warband. Kind of the member she's
Do
got
you
a
remember
crush
what the
on.
war band is called? Their
I
war
do not
band?
remember what her warband is called, no.
She does not actually have a crush on him. It's the other way around.
I thought she kind of had a crush on him too, but
No, she had no interest in him, and she actually spurned his advances until much later in the book. So you're wrong.
well,
You
there
really
go.
can't read, can you? Romantic advances, Jesus Christ.
So Bjor eventually becomes a love interest for Elvar, and they take to sneaking off in the night to roll around in the hay, we'll say. And Bjor's characters, it's interesting. Me, I guess you're right. Now I'm thinking about it. He definitely is very interested in her, and like is because he gives like those lovey-dovey eyes all the time, and Grand would be like, "Hey, stop it!" Like get mad at him for being like that. Yeah, you're right. And then eventually, so Elvar eventually decides to give him the time of day, and they kind of get together and are
okay. Bjor is, once again, it's hinted that he is more than he says he is because of how he treats other people. Like, he's always the goofy, fun-loving character, doesn't take himself too seriously, all that stuff. He is also, when they pick up all the tainted, he's the only one who's actually nice to them. He's the only one who treats them like they're normal human people and not neither tainted nor thralls. He treats them all very well. You don't pick up on that hint that something is going on afoot with him, then I don't know what to tell you. But I'm assuming Michael did not pick up that he might have been tainted.
And yeah, you're right. He is tainted, and it turns out that not only is he tainted, but he was working with the bad guys, and he betrayed Elvar's warband, and actually ends up killing the leader of the warband as well. Which I'm assuming that's the scene you were referencing with Elvar, like how she's going to feel about the tainted after this.
Yeah, because he also comes from the rat god, which is funny because in
Rota,
the whole
right?
Yeah. I don't know how you pronounce it, but throughout the whole book, it's told, you get a little bit of the story of the gods, of like kind of what happened. And I think Rota is a male god.
I think that's right.
Because there are male and female gods. Rota is the one that, or however you pronounce it, is the one that betrayed some of the gods to their brothers and sister. And so like she always goes, she's like, of course he would be the betrayer. It's in his blood. And I was like,
conniving and scheming. Yeah.
Like, there is nothing worse than a woman scorned. So curious to know how that's gonna happen or how that's gonna work. But
moral of the story is, in book 2, Bjorn gonna get killed by Elvar. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what's gonna happen with their relationship. But yeah.
But I think that's a decent snapshot of Bjorn. I'll let you talk about Agnar, since I always start poorly, and I'll jump in if I have something to add.
Oh, okay. Agnar is just the main boss man of their warband. Like, he's kind of an asshole. Isn't he?
Yes, he is kind of an asshole. He is the leader of the warband. I would say, I mean, he's an asshole in general because he's a slaver and we find out all these bad things, but he's pretty nice to Elvar. Like, he kind of takes, he lets her be part of like his like kind of inner circle a little bit.
I wouldn't say he's nice to Avar. He's one of those people who, if it benefits him, he's going to treat you well. If it does not benefit him, then he's not going to treat you well. That's how I got, or at least that's the vibe I got from him. So I don't know if that's right or not. We'll never know because his ass is dead.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of the vibe I got. Like, he is very war driven. What is they call it? There's a word that Elvar uses, like battle fame. He's very battle fame driven.
Oh,
like, he wants to be the best known group in the whole realms.
So that is Agnar. The last character with Elvar is Uspa, who is the
Cedar Witch.
Yep, she's a Satyr Witch. She was kidnapped along with her son and husband by Agnar and their group. They sell her husband, and then her son gets kidnapped, and she tells Agnar that she will tell him where this like location is that no one can find, that Barbara was talking about, where the final battle of the gods took place. If he helps her find her son. And so they make this deal. That's actually like a blood pact. They make a blood pact. Her and Agnar and Elvar and a bunch of the other people in her warband.
It's not a bunch of people. It's literally just Elvar, Grend, Agnar, and his second in command dude. That's right. I always forget his name.
I don't remember his name either.
Just them.
But that's Uspa. She's a Satyr Witch. She's also a badass. Very, very powerful. We find out when it comes to the scenes, the fight scene, I guess, at the end in the Battlefield of the Gods. I can't remember the name for it, but
yeah, she's also Glornir's wife's sister. That
Yes.
is who Uspa is. They are related.
And the final character that I wanted to talk about is I guess the kind of one of the antagonists, like you mentioned earlier. There's not really
don't really know that she's an antagonist until literally at the end of the book, because she doesn't pop up until literally like 3/4 down the line, and even then you don't think she's going to play a pivotal role until she shows back up until like the last 2 chapters of the book.
So she's the leader of a different war band, the Raven Feeders. She shows up at the battlefield. She's telling about she was following Elvar and her crew. And her big thing that happens in the book, I guess, outside of this confrontation with Agnar, where Agnar eventually gets killed by Bjor when Bjor revealed to be the traitor and all that stuff we already talked about. She and her crew, she's the one who's been stealing all these tainted children. And we find out that she's stolen all these tainted children because she wants to perform a ritual to awaken Lik Riva, the dragon goddess, I guess, right?
Yeah, she's a goddess. Well, yeah. I mean, I think they call them all gods, but she's a woman or a female god, because I don't think they're not human, so it's not a woman. I don't know. And
I think that, so like Barbara said, in this book, she's definitely not throughout the book, but I think in the next book she'll play a larger role because she's awakened this god, and
because she is a dragonborn.
Correct. They all were, right? All the Raven Feeders.
Oh, that I don't know. I know her and her brothers were, and her brother is... So this is another way that they're all connected too. Like, Orca is chasing her son who got kidnapped. By that, we find out that she doesn't know is Ilska's brother.
That's right.
Drinkir. I don't know how you say
something
his name.
Like that,
it's something to that effect. I apologize in butchering these people's names. So it's her brother, and he is also the Dragonborn, and so that's how Orca and Ilska are connected. I don't think Varg and Ilska is connected, except for maybe if that Godderman is maybe working with Ilska and them, and maybe not the queen. I don't really know if the queen is involved in this somehow. Her son is, because Orca actually sees the queen's son in a little area where the child stealing people are, and he kind of seems to be a part of that. So maybe we don't really know yet. And then obviously with Elvar story plot, Ilska is their kind of rivalries, and then follows them into this promised land and opens up the gate. No, I don't know, the burial grounds of where Lik Riva is, and at the ending is pretty much her setting her free.
Yes. And I was going to say, I think that maybe the connection for Ilska and Varg will be when he's eventually able to do that ceremony and find out who killed his sister, that it ends up being, it was Ilska or her brother.
Oh, you think so?
That's my thought, maybe.
I mean, maybe, because we don't know how young Varg's little sister was. So we don't know if there's an age range for Ilska stealing tainted children. You know, obviously she is tainted, so that's a good point. I don't know. We don't really know much about that, so I will be curious to know how that happened.
But move on to some questions. The first one I want to talk about is, what were the roles of women in the book and in the world, and were they well-written characters? Were there enough women characters?
Okay, so the women seem to be close enough, or almost at the same level as men in this world. We don't really get a lot of she's a woman, she can't do this type of a thing in there. We do get a little bit of that for Elvar, as far as her dad and older brother don't believe that she should be in a warband. She's a woman and she should go and marry off people for his. But that's just those two characters. Everyone else treats women just like they would treat a man. So in that sense, I feel like they're in the same level in this world, which is very nice and very refreshing to see. There's definitely no damsel in distress in this fantasy book, because I feel like, and this has always been my gripe with fantasy novels written by men, is women roles tend to just be kind of that, where they are love interest for the male, they die for the male interest to move along his plot or whatever, or they're just kind of side pieces, not really adding much to the story. Whereas this one, I feel like the men kind of take a back role. Is that what is the term for that?
Backseat.
Thank you. A backseat. As far as just the badassery of the women in here. You also don't see him a lot of didn't see a lot of your stereotypical gender roles, like the wife stays and cooks. It's like, no, like Orca was actually, Thorkel even mentions that Orca is a better fighter than he is. He even point blank mentions that. And Orca's like, oh yeah, but you're a better tracker, which normally tracking was, I feel like, what women did, not necessarily the men. So that was just, it was nice and refreshing to see this. I do think they were well written. They did have, and what I enjoyed is they had flaws and character growths. They were good and bad and everything in between. Like, they were actually allowed to exist in this world, where in most fantasy novels you don't get that. You maybe get one good woman character, female character in these fantasy novels, and the author was like, oh, let me give you all these stuff, and then for all the other characters there's just very flat women characters. Not in this case here. It was just really nice to finally see that a novel, high fantasy novel, or even fantasy novel written by a man that included such a diverse cast of women. And by diverse, I mean obviously not skin tone or LGBTQ, that kind of diverse. We're just talking about women in general. You had the badass women, you had women that were the, how do you say, satyr which
witch.
is, you had women, but they all had their they had, I don't know, it's just everything. I liked it. I really enjoyed it. So
I pretty much agree with everything you said. I don't know if I have a lot to add to that. I think that it was cool to see women in, like you said, there really were no gender roles. Like, the men and women did the same thing, with the exception of Elvar's father's kind of jarldom, or whatever you want to call that. But for the rest part, they all did. They were doing the same thing. They were equal partners, like you mentioned, Orca and Thorkel. And I thought it was cool that 2 of the 3 POV characters were not only women, but badass women. It was cool to see. And I read a lot of fantasy books, and a lot of fantasy books written by men, and Barbara is 100% correct that a lot of them do their female characters a disservice. And John Gwynne,
that never seemed to bother you until I mentioned it, though.
It's something that I think I was ignorant to. It's something I didn't notice until you mentioned it, and then once you mentioned it, it was like, oh shit, yeah, she's right. And so I think John Gwynne did a fantastic job with the female characters in this book, because he wrote them like every other character, instead of having them be lesser or something different just because they were female. And that was really cool.
The only caveat that I would say, and I don't think it's a ping on him, I just think he wanted to write how other male fantasy authors write, with all these male characters where they're all the badass and the fighting. It would have been nice to see a woman who was a badass, but not necessarily a fighter, if that makes sense. Because both POV characters are. I do think we might get that more in the Satyr witches. The Satyr witches, because I feel like they're a little more soft, in the sense they don't choose violence. They just use it to protect themselves. So I really like Uspa. I don't know if I'm saying her. Uspa's character. I feel like she was more of that softer, badass character that I still enjoy reading about. So I'm hoping maybe we get a little bit more of that type of a female character. But that's my only, and then it's not even a bad thing. It's just a little tidbit, I guess, of info.
Yeah, that's fair. So let's talk about the magic system. This book has a really unique magic system called the Tainted. What are your thoughts on how the author implemented it and the system as a whole? I thought it was really cool. It was very interesting that they all have different powers, and those powers were related to the Norse god. And I like mythology. I'm not as versed in it as Barbara is. I'm going to say that right out of the gates, so I'll defer to her for talking more about that. But I thought that was really a really neat system to see powers associated with that. It was a very unique system. I really thought it was cool. I thought the way that the Tainted were built were really neat. I think that in future books, we're going to see a lot more variety. The majority of what we see in this first book are the wolf god Ulfrir and the bear god, the berserkers. And then I guess the dragonborn, we get a lot of those at the end all of a sudden. But I think that we're going to see more of that, and we're also going to maybe see some more gods awaken in the future too, which would be really cool. But yeah, I really liked it. I thought John Gwynne did a good job implementing it.
Yeah, I really loved it, but I wouldn't say it's a magic system per se, at least not in the normal sense of the word, where you think of either spells or incantations and magic things are flying around. It's more that the characters had special abilities determined by what god they were related to, and then with a few characters able to do cider magic. Did I say it right?
Cider.
Dang it. See, what does it say one more time? Seder. You know what? We're just gonna come to the conclusion that I'll keep saying it wrong all this times, and you please don't write mean reviews. I understand I'm saying it wrong. Clearly, I'm probably not gonna say it. Seder magic.
There you go.
So, and the characters that do Seder magic, at least from the Tainted, are actually derived from the main baddie god, which was the snake god, which I thought that was very interesting. So I just love the connections to the gods and how their abilities derived from them. I thought that was super interesting. And we also got a little bit of the rat god. So we have like two characters that we learned, and neither of them kind of are painted in a well picture. So I'm curious to know about that. But yeah, I'm very excited to learn about the other gods and how they're involved in their children. And if we're going to meet more Tainted from the different gods as well.
So moving on from that, what do you think about the scheme to kidnap all the Tainted children? Do you think that the ritual to free Vigrið is the end goal, or do the Ravens have more in store for those kids?
I feel like clearly there's more in store for those poor kids, unfortunately. I don't think that's the only reason that they took them. So I figured they were kidnapping them for a reason. I think they'll play a bigger role in the future books, and I'm curious to know like what that is going to entail. I'm also very curious to know, because right now, as far as we're aware of, the Tainted seem to stick with their own as far as like breeding. Oh, is that bad saying it, breeding, as far as
I think that's appropriate in this case.
But you don't
like
call humans breeding.
Yeah.
As far as having children.
Right.
So
they stick within their own like variety of Tainted. How about that?
Well, yes. That wasn't the issue I had with, but fair enough. But I'm curious to know, because we find out that Orca and Thorkel's son is an intermix between two, like the bear god and the wolf god. So I'm curious to know, maybe they were taking, because he's the only kid that we know of that has been taken, and he's the only one that we know a lot about. So I'm curious to know, are these Tainted children just all Tainted children, or are they Tainted children from these people who have intermixed their bloodlines? So that's kind of what I was wondering, if these kids, not only are they Tainted, but even special in the Tainted community, as in like if they're an intermixed, because yeah, anyway, that's just me theorizing, but I do think they have a bigger role. I'm curious to know what it is, and I'm curious about that, what I just mentioned.
So I agree with you. I think that they do have more plans for these kids. That's a really interesting thought about them being, if maybe they're all Tainted that are hybrids. We'll see, I guess. But I think that even if we say that resurrecting Vigrið was the end goal, I think that it's still not going to be a happy ending for these kids, because it's not like if Ilska's done with them, she's like, okay, well, let's all go back to your parents and live out your lives. Like, she's probably going to sell them, because that's just what.
I don't think she would sell them, because she is a Tainted too. Why would you do that to your own kids? I think either they're going to create a little army of these kids, and that's why it made me think that they're more special, because they have better abilities, because they have both bloodlines as abilities to work with.
That's interesting.
Instead of just one. That's why I don't foresee them killing them. Like, that would be a waste, and why would they do that to their own kind? You know, I think it's more of an army. Like, I think they're building an army with these little kids.
Interesting. Well, I guess we'll see, right?
Yeah.
So in this book, there were 3 POV characters. What did you think of them and their development throughout the book? And do you think that each of them had a unique voice? I liked all of the POV characters. Like Barbara was giving me grief for before, I didn't like Elvar at first. I'd say for like probably the first half of the book, if I'm being honest, I was not a big fan of hers. But once I started to like her character, I think that was when like her serious character development kind of kicked off, and I really enjoyed how her character was developing. I loved Orca. I thought she was a really cool character, even though hers was effectively just a revenge story. It was really told well. Varg was probably my favorite of the 3. I don't know. It's a tie between Varg and Orca. I really enjoyed Varg's story though as well. It was cool to see him slowly open up and become less focused on revenge and realize that he can be happy and he can have friends and he can live his life without this cloud over him all the time like he was living before. But as far as if they each had a unique voice, I think it's kind of yes and no. So for the most part, yes. But on some token, like all three of our characters are badass fighters. And so there were times where I would be reading either an Elvar chapter or a Varg chapter. And if it was a moment where they weren't specifically talking about names of the people in the band, I had to be like, oh, wait, hold on. Which war band are we talking about? But other than that, I think that generally they had their own independent voices.
So I think Elvar had and still has, and I've already mentioned all this before, but she still has the most growing to do out of the three, given that she's the youngest and the only one that's not tainted and kind of has, like I said, a closed-minded view of this world, while Orca, being the oldest of the POV characters, is pretty well established in who she is. She does go through some development, but like I mentioned earlier, it's not as significant, I think, as the other two. So I'm curious to know how she's going to continue to develop in the future books. I also enjoyed Varg's character development and how he learned to trust the Bloodsworn, his story throughout. I'm not so sure I was sold on the uniqueness of each of their individual voices, though. I think I would have preferred a little more diversity in their voices since they seem pretty similar overall. I think Varg would be the easier one to point out, not only because he's a guy, and that's not even why I'm mentioning that. It's because to me, he read more innocent because he was a thrall and because he didn't experience the world like the other two have. He comes for a very limited background. So I just saw him in innocent, not in like murder and all that kind of sense, or even how to read people. I just meant innocent in his worldview of the world. Like he's not closed-minded. He's very open to a lot of things. And he's like kind of like this more malleable character because whatever people are feeding into him, he's taking it in, you know, like he's heard of the tainted, but he has no like huge ill will towards them. He gets a little bit of this like, oh, everyone hates them kind of a feeling, but he himself is like, I don't really hate them because I never needed to. That kind of a vibe from him. I had a harder time actually between Elvar and Orca because they are kind of similar in the sense that they're very hot-headed individuals. They're very brash individuals. They're very great emotional individuals. I love that they're emotion driven. That's kind of what drives their characters to do certain things. I think maybe Elvar is a little more restrained than Orca is in the sense that she does a little more thinking, I think, than Orca does, where Orca is just like, do as I say, not as I do. Kind of a character where she's like, hey, you need to have a plan, but my plan is just go in and murder people. And Elvar has a little bit of thinking because you get some scenes where she's deciding what she's going to do and what she wants to do. And it's actually like a pensive moment for her, which I don't think Orca would have been doing something like that. But I wish that we had more of a uniqueness to their point of view characters, because if you removed the characters in their story and then kind of what they're doing, you would be like, okay, so whose story am I reading? Because they kind of read a little similar to me.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a fair point. Moving on from that, was there a plot twist that really took you by surprise?
Yes, and probably not one Michael would think. I was blown away about how everyone was connected. I actually was not expecting anyone in the book to be connected whatsoever in this book. I thought it was going to be like just these three point of views that we probably won't get to see connected until maybe like the second book. And I don't know. I wasn't really sure how he was going to be like, oh, they're going to fight together for Likrifa or Likriva. I don't know how you say her name.
The second one.
Okay, Likrifa to like take her down, and maybe that's how they're gonna like war or gonna come together. But I was shooketh when we found out that Orca's husband was brother with Varg's warband leader Glormir, whose wife is the sister of the tainted cedar witch that Elvar's warband hunted down and then followed to Oskutred. There's the word. Oskutred.
Yes, that is it.
I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. Oskutred. I just was like when I got to these, and it's literally like the last few chapters that you get that connection, and I literally just sat there, was like, oh my god, that is amazing. That is so cool how they're connected, and I feel like that's how we're going to get the interweaving between the characters, because they're somehow connected very minutely what you think, but I obviously it's going to be much bigger, and I was just like, wow, I was not expecting that I not in a million years would have guessed the connections whatsoever.
As someone who is sitting next to her when she got to that part of the book, I can attest that she really did verbalize her shock. But
shooketh, I was very
shooketh. Yeah,
very,
she was
yes.
shooketh. There are a lot of plot twists took me by surprise, but that's because I don't predict anything. So them being connected was a surprising thing, but I mean, I think it was more surprising to find out some of the characters were tainted. Not necessarily Varg in particular, but that the entire Bloodsworn was tainted was kind of a cool plot twist that took me by surprise. The other big one that was kind of like, holy shit, when it happened was when Bjor turned on Elvar and not only turned on her, but killed Agnar.
He didn't turn on her because he actually likes her. He
turned on
the
them.
leader. No, he turned on the leader's warband because he saw him. Well, I mean, he's not wrong. Like, he literally is a glorified slave trader of his people, Michael.
You're right.
If you look at it, his point of view, like...
But that was a very shocking scene for him to all of a sudden flip sides and then kill Agnar.
Yes.
So those are probably the two biggest plot twists for me. There are a lot of them in the book for me, but that's just how it is when you're Michael and you're reading books, because everything's a plot twist and you can't predict anything. Beyond that, what did you think of the ending? And I think that's me again. So I liked the ending. I think it was, everything just hit the fan at the end, and it was going and going and going. And then it's not like we really got a resolution. It was like, oh my God, there's such a cliffhanger. And I really want to read the next book. And I really liked it. I thought that, like, I can't imagine if I had read this, like, right when it came out, I would have been so pissed at John Gwynne for leaving it the way that he did and be like, oh, no, it was really well written. Everything kind of weaved together nicely. As Barbara mentioned with the last question, that was really cool to see the connections between all the main characters.
So I thought it was amazing, great, all the words of an ending. Like, I enjoyed how all the characters' threads were finally combined, and it was a hell of a cliffhanger. Nothing gets resolved. If anything, more questions are asked. You do get a few that are answered, but like the ones that are answered, like, so we have like 10 questions you're waiting for. You get 5 answered, and then you get 20 new ones, And like, I feel like that's how you write a book, because you want to like... But it was satisfying, too. It was a very satisfying ending. Like, Orca does not find her son, so her quest continues. Elvar gets betrayed, and all the, like, her world pretty much gets blown up in her face, and, like, what is she going to do? And same with Varg's, like, he finally discovers who he is, and now it's going to be, like, his story of figuring that out and helping this group that he didn't have any intention of staying with. He sees them as family that he's never had, just really great. Just makes me really excited to pick up the second book. And I'm really excited. If you haven't noticed, I just want to see where the characters grow from there.
And I think we've effectively answered the next question, which is, are you going to continue the series? We've both said numerous times throughout this recording that yes. And I can attest that it's already on the bookshelf. So we are going to continue the series. So I'm just going to skip that and move on to the next one. Barbara, what are your predictions for book 2, Hunger of the Gods?
I feel like I kind of answered this a little bit, but I think that maybe more gods will be resurrected. I'm not sure in this world if that's possible, because we know that Lick-Rifa was alive technically. They just didn't know where she was. Are the other gods alive? I mean, we see some of their bones. I'm not really sure how that's going to work, but something of that effect. And I think the back of the second book even hints about it anyway, so that's something that's going to happen. I already kind of mentioned what I thought the kids, what's in store for them. I feel like they're going to be used as a little army of sorts of little tainted children. Like I said, the hybrid, is that a connection? Is that the only children that were taken, or is it just normal tainted children too? I'm very curious to know about that. And I'm curious to know how the characters are going to be slowly meeting up with one another, if they're even going to meet up with one another, how they're going to interact with one another. Like I already mentioned earlier, just kind of where their characters left off and where they're going to go from this. All the things.
I have all the same thoughts that Barbara does on this, to be honest. I think more gods will probably get awakened, like she said. That's kind of hinted at in the back of the book in the next one. I'm not going to say that I predicted that the Tainted are going to rally behind Ligriva, because I didn't. I think that's an interesting thought. Beyond that, the more gods are going to be resurrected, I don't really have any other predictions for this. To be honest with you, I don't know how the characters are all going to come together. I think, I mean, it's obvious that how Varg and Orca are probably going to meet, because they're effectively like about to meet at the end of the book. But it's going to be interesting to see how Elbar plays into that. But I'm so excited to read it, and I hope that it will do a bonus episode maybe for it in the future.
Yeah.
Moving on from that, let's talk about our individual scores. What did you give this one?
An 8.5.
Me too. 8.5. That's why the average was so easy this time. No crazy decimal points, just an 8.5.
Yep.
And that was our group score as well, obviously. Since we both
I was
gave
going to
it
do
an
8.75, but I feel like you would have gotten real pissed off at me, because
I wouldn't.
I do believe
as long
in
as you
8.75.
as long as you guys keep it in 0.25 increments, it's fine.
So
if you
if
ever
I
feel
give
like,
it,
I'm going to give this book a 7.3 repeating, like, no.
we've never done that. We've never done that. So if I gave it an 8.75, what would the average be? The repeating 8.6.
I'd be 8.6, somewhere around there.
8.6 tree 2 1 3 tree.
Yes. Something like that. But yeah, so that's our score for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you're following Badass Literature for free in your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating if they allow you to, and leave us a review if they do as well. Super important. It helps our podcast get seen, more likely to be featured, stuff like that in searches. Also, if you're not following us already, don't forget to be following us on social media. Our handle is at BadassLitPod on both Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah, so if you have feedback about today's episode, you can contact us by writing to badassliteraturesociety@gmail.com. You can also send us a DM or leave a comment on Instagram or Facebook.
Thank you so much for listening. I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
Bye.